The crystal glasses clinked softly as May balanced the silver tray on her palm, weaving between tables at the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom. Tonight was the annual charity gala, where the city's richest and most powerful gathered to show off their wealth while pretending it was all for a good cause. May had been working here for 3 years now, and these fancy events all looked the same to her: expensive dresses, fake smiles, and guests who looked through her as if she were invisible. "More champagne, miss?" she asked a woman dripping in diamonds, her voice pleasant but not too friendly. The hotel had strict rules about that. Be helpful without being noticed. The woman barely glanced up. "Yes, fine," she said, plucking a glass from May's tray without a thank you. May was used to it. At 26, she'd mastered the art of becoming part of the background. Her black and white uniform helped with that, designed to blend in with the hotel's elegant decor. What none of these guests knew was that beneath her quiet exterior, May noticed everything. She listened to their conversations about music and art, mentally correcting them when they mixed up composers or called a sonata a symphony. The Grand Meridian's ballroom was truly something to behold tonight. Massive flower arrangements towered over tables covered in crisp white linens. The chandeliers above sparkled like falling stars, casting a warm glow over the crowd of 200 guests who'd paid $5,000 per plate for the privilege of being seen at the children's hospital benefit. May checked her watch discreetly. 4 more hours of her shift to go. Then she could head home to her tiny apartment, kick off these painful shoes, and maybe practice for an hour before falling into bed. The thought of her piano waiting at home made her smile slightly. It wasn't much, an old upright she'd found on an online marketplace for next to nothing, but she'd restored it herself, and the sound was surprisingly good. "You, waitress, another round for our table." May turned to see a red-faced businessman waving his empty glass at her. She nodded politely and headed toward the service area. As she pushed through the swinging doors, the controlled chaos of the kitchen hit her. The clatter of dishes, the shouts of the chef, the rush of servers loading their trays. "How's it going out there?" asked Raj, another server who had started around the same time as May. He was rushing past with a tray of desserts. "Same as always," May replied with a small smile. "Rich people drinking too much and talking too loud." Raj laughed. "Just 4 more hours. We can do this." May refreshed her tray with champagne flutes and headed back into the ballroom. The small orchestra in the corner was playing something light and classical. Vivaldi she recognized immediately. She loved watching their fingers move across the strings, the way the violinist swayed slightly with the music. In another life, that could have been her up there, but with a piano instead. Music had always been her escape. Growing up, her grandmother had taught her to play on an old piano in their living room. "You have a gift," she used to say, watching May's small fingers find the right keys by instinct rather than training. By the time she was 12, May was playing pieces that most adults struggled with. By 16, she'd been accepted to the prestigious National Music Academy with a partial scholarship. But then life happened. Her grandmother got sick, the medical bills piled up, and the scholarship wasn't enough. May had put her dreams on hold, promising herself it was temporary. That was 8 years ago now. The temporary pause had stretched into something that felt disturbingly permanent. As she moved around the edge of the ballroom, May overheard snippets of conversation: stock, prices, vacation homes, private schools. The gap between her world and theirs sometimes felt impossibly wide, but when the music played, that gap disappeared. Music didn't care if you served champagne or drank it from crystal flutes that cost more than her monthly rent. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced from the small stage, "dinner will be served shortly. Please enjoy the musical stylings of our string quartet while you find your assigned tables." May continued her rounds, refilling glasses and clearing small plates. Her feet were already aching, but she'd learned to ignore the pain. The money was good, especially with tips from events like these. Every dollar brought her closer to finishing her degree at the city college, where she took night classes in music performance. "Excuse me," a gentle voice said, and May turned to find an elderly man smiling at her. Unlike many of the guests, he looked directly at her face. Could I trouble you for some water instead? Of course, sir, May replied, surprised by the simple kindness in his request. I'll bring that right away. As she headed back toward the kitchen, she noticed a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. The event coordinator, a tall woman named Ms. Cho, who was known for her perfect planning and terrible temper, was having what appeared to be a heated discussion with the hotel manager. Their voices were hushed, but their expressions and hand gestures suggested something had gone very wrong. May slowed her pace, curious despite herself. What do you mean he's not coming? Ms. Cho was saying, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. The entire second half of the evening is built around his performance. The manager, a balding man who always seemed slightly sweaty, was shaking his head. His assistant called 5 minutes ago. Food poisoning. He's in the emergency room. Food poisoning? Today of all days? Ms. Cho looked like she might explode. Do you have any idea how much we're paying him? Or how important tonight is? I understand, but unless you want him vomiting on your grand piano, we need a backup plan. The manager replied. May had stopped pretending not to listen. They were clearly talking about the famous pianist who was scheduled to perform after dinner. His name had been featured prominently on all the event invitations, a major selling point for the expensive tickets. A backup plan? The gala is already underway. Ms. Cho clutched her clipboard like it was the only thing keeping her from floating away in panic. We can't just find a world-class pianist in the next hour. What about starting the auction early? The manager suggested. And have an hour of dead time after? Absolutely not. Ms. Cho closed her eyes briefly. The program lists a 45-minute piano recital before the auction. These people paid for a show. May stood frozen, her empty tray forgotten in her hands. Before she could think better of it, she took a step toward them. Excuse me, she said quietly. Both the manager and Ms. Cho turned to her with identical expressions of annoyance. What is it? Ms. Cho snapped. We're in the middle of something. May took a deep breath. I couldn't help overhearing. About the pianist. Unless you happen to have Yuri Kovalenko's phone number, I don't see how this concerns you, Ms. Cho said dismissively. I don't, May admitted. But I can play. The manager frowned. Play what? The piano, May said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. I've been studying classical piano for 20 years. I know most of the standard repertoire. Ms. Cho let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're a waitress. Yes, May agreed, standing straighter. A waitress who studied at the National Music Academy for 2 years before I had to drop out. A waitress who can play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 from memory, along with most of Chopin's nocturnes and several Bach preludes. The manager and Ms. Cho exchanged a look. You can't be serious, Ms. Cho said, but there was a hint of desperate hope in her voice now. I am, May replied. I can audition right now if you want. The manager rubbed his forehead. Lisa, what choice do we have? Either we let her try or you explain to 200 rich donors why half their evening's entertainment isn't happening. Ms. Cho stared at May for a long moment, taking in her plain face, her simple uniform, her practical shoes. Nothing about her screamed world-class pianist. But the desperation in her eyes was real. Fine, she said finally. Come with me. Now. May quickly handed her tray to a passing server and followed Ms. Cho toward a side door that led to a small room with a baby grand piano. Her hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear. After years of playing for only herself, after years of serving instead of performing, after years of watching others live their dreams while hers gathered dust, here was her chance. Play something, Ms. Cho commanded, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Impress me. May sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes for just a moment, then began to play the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The music flowed from her fingers like water, filling the small room with sound so beautiful it almost hurt. Ms. Cho's stern expression slowly melted away as she watched the waitress transform before her eyes. When May finished, the room was completely silent. Then Ms. Cho cleared her throat. "What else can you play?" she asked, her voice considerably softer than before. May smiled for the first time that evening. "What would you like to hear?" Ms. Cho paced the small room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped and checked her watch for the third time in 2 minutes. "Dinner service ends in 40 minutes, she said. "Then we have that gap to fill before the auction. You really think you can do this?" May nodded, still seated, at the piano. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, not playing but feeling their familiar shape. "I know I can." "It's not just about playing," Ms. Cho said, her voice tight with stress. "These people paid thousands for their tickets. They're expecting Yuri Kovalenko, not—" She waved her hand vaguely at May's uniform. "Not a waitress," May finished for her. The hotel manager, who had been silent during May's audition, finally spoke up. "She's good, Lisa. Really good. And we're out of options." Ms. Cho closed her eyes for a moment, clearly weighing impossible choices. When she opened them, she had the look of someone about to jump off a cliff and hoping there was water below. "All right," she said, "but we need to do something about all of this." She gestured at May's appearance from head to toe. 20 minutes later, May stood in the staff locker room, barely recognizing herself in the mirror. The hotel's concierge had found a dress from the lost and found a simple black evening gown that someone had left behind months ago. It was a bit loose in some places and tight in others, but with a few safety pins and the help of another server who had once worked in a tailor shop, it looked surprisingly good. Her hair, normally pulled back in a practical bun for work, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders thanks to the hotel spa's stylist who had been called in for an emergency makeover. A touch of borrowed makeup completed the transformation. 10 minutes, said Ms. Cho, appearing in the doorway. She paused when she saw May. "Well, that's better." May took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. This wasn't how she had imagined her first real performance in years would happen. But then again, nothing in her life had gone according to plan. "I'll need to see the piano," she said. "Every instrument is different. I should test it before playing." Ms. Cho nodded. "Come with me, quickly." They hurried through the back hallways of the hotel, avoiding the main ballroom where guests were finishing their dessert. The grand piano waited on a small raised platform at one end of the room, its polished black surface gleaming under the chandeliers. May approached it with reverence. This was a Steinway concert grand, the kind she had only played a handful of times in her life. She ran her fingers lightly over the fallboard before lifting it to reveal the keys beneath. "May I?" she asked, and without waiting for an answer, she sat down and played a quick scale, then a chord progression testing the action and the tone. The sound was magnificent, filling the empty ballroom with pure, rich notes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It should be," Ms. Cho replied. "It cost more than my car." She checked her watch again. "I need to talk to the MC. Wait here until he announces you." Left alone, May closed her eyes and tried to center herself. Her heart was racing, her palms slightly damp. She wiped them on a napkin she had grabbed from the staff room. What was she thinking? In a few minutes she would be playing for the wealthiest people in the city. People who attended symphonies and operas regularly. People who would know if she made even the smallest mistake. A memory surfaced. Her grandmother sitting beside her on the piano bench, her weathered hands guiding May's small fingers to the right keys. "Music comes from here," she had said, placing her hand over May's heart. "The piano is just how you let others hear it." May took another deep breath. She could do this. She would do this. The ballroom doors opened and servers began clearing the last of the dessert plates. Guests chatted among themselves, unaware of the crisis that had been unfolding behind the scenes. May watched from her hidden spot behind a decorative screen near the piano as the room filled. She recognized some of the faces from serving them earlier. Would they recognize her? The hotel manager approached, looking slightly less sweaty than before. "Ms. Cho told me to check on you. Are you ready?" May nodded, though her stomach was doing flips. "Good," he said. Because we're about to announce you. What pieces are you going to play? May had been thinking about this. I'll start with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, then move to Bach's Prelude in C major, and finish with Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, just the first movement since it's the most recognizable. The manager blinked. I have no idea what any of that means, but it sounds impressive. Good luck. He walked away, leaving May alone again with her thoughts and the gleaming piano. The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a spotlight appeared on the small stage, where a middle-aged man in a tuxedo approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice smooth and professional. "On behalf of the Children's Hospital Foundation, I want to thank you all for your generosity tonight. As many of you know, we had planned for the world-renowned pianist, Yuri Kovalenko, to perform for us this evening." A murmur of anticipation ran through the crowd. "Unfortunately," the MC continued, "Mr. Kovalenko has been taken ill and sends his deepest regrets." The murmur turned to disappointed groans and whispers. However, the MC raised his hand to quiet the crowd. "We are incredibly fortunate to have found a remarkable talent to perform for us tonight. Please welcome to the stage, May Lin." The spotlight swung to where May stood, momentarily blinding her. She blinked against the brightness and walked to the piano with as much grace as she could muster. The applause was polite but reserved. Clearly, the guests were skeptical. As she took her seat at the bench, May caught sight of Ms. Cho standing at the edge of the room, her face tight with worry. The hotel manager stood beside her, his expression suggesting he was prepared for disaster. May adjusted the bench, then placed her hands on the keys. The room fell silent, everyone waiting to see what this unknown replacement could do. She could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her, judging her before she had played a single note. For a terrible moment, May's mind went blank. What was she doing here? She was just a waitress, not a concert pianist. This was madness. Then, from somewhere deep inside, she heard her grandmother's voice again. "Music comes from here." May closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the ballroom. Delicate, haunting, beautiful. May let the music flow through her, forgetting about the audience, about her borrowed dress, about everything except the sound. Her fingers found the keys without conscious thought, moving with a grace and certainty that came from thousands of hours of practice. As she played, the tension in the room slowly dissolved. People who had been whispering fell silent. Those who had been checking their phones slipped them back into pockets and purses. Even the servers paused in their work, standing at the edges of the room, listening. May moved from Chopin to Bach without pause, the transition smooth and natural. The Bach prelude was simpler in some ways, but she infused it with a warmth and emotion that made it sound fresh and alive. When she finally began the Rachmaninoff, she felt rather than heard the collective intake of breath from the audience. This was a challenging piece even for professional pianists, bold, passionate, and technically demanding. May's fingers flew across the keys, building the dramatic tension of the first movement. The music swelled and receded like waves, filling the grand ballroom with sound that seemed impossible from just one instrument and one pair of hands. As she played the final notes of the movement, May opened her eyes, coming back to herself and the room. For a moment there was complete silence. Then the applause began. It started slowly, then grew until it filled the ballroom. Not the polite, obligatory clapping from before, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Some people were standing, others were looking at each other in disbelief, mouthing words like amazing and incredible. May stood and gave a small bow, her cheeks flushed with emotion. As she looked out at the crowd, she noticed something strange. Several people were looking at her with confusion, then recognition dawning on their faces. They had realized who she was. From her spot at the edge of the room, Ms. Cho was beaming, all traces of worry gone from her face. The hotel manager beside her looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. The MC approached the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, May Lin." More applause. May took another bow, not sure what to do next. She hadn't expected this response. The MC leaned toward her. "They want an encore," he said quietly. May nodded, returning to the piano. As she sat down, she noticed an older gentleman in the front row watching her intently. There was something familiar about him. Then she realized it was the kind man who had asked for water earlier. She smiled at him before turning back to the keys. For her encore, she chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that had always brought her comfort during difficult times. As the dreamy, impressionistic notes floated through the air, May felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever happened, after tonight she had this moment. She was playing again, really playing for people who appreciated music the way she did. When the final gentle notes of the Debussy faded away, the silence that followed felt like a prayer. Then once again the room erupted in applause, even louder than before. As May stood to take her final bow, she caught sight of Raj and some of the other servers standing at the back of the room, grinning and clapping wildly for their colleague. Ms. Cho was already moving toward the stage, her clipboard forgotten, her face transformed by a genuine smile. Something had changed in that ballroom, and May knew her life would never be the same again. The minutes after May's performance passed in a blur. People crowded around the piano. Faces she had served drinks to earlier now looked at her with newfound respect and curiosity. Hands reached out to shake hers, voices overlapped with praise and questions. How long had she been playing? Where did she study? Why hadn't they heard of her before? May answered as best she could, still dazed by what had just happened. Since I was 4, the National Music Academy for 2 years. I had to stop for a while. Ms. Cho hovered nearby, beaming with relief and what looked suspiciously like pride, as if she had discovered May herself. The hotel manager kept shaking his head in disbelief, muttering, "A waitress, just a waitress," under his breath. "Excuse me." A deep voice cut through the chatter. The crowd parted to reveal the older gentleman who had asked May for water earlier in the evening. Up close, she could see that his suit, while simple, was impeccably tailored. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, bright and intelligent, studied her with interest. "That was quite remarkable," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had lived in many places, particularly the Rachmaninoff. Few pianists can capture both the technical precision and the emotional depth. "Thank you," May replied, unsure who this man was, but sensing he knew what he was talking about. He held out his hand. "I'm Theo Nakamura." May froze. Everyone in the classical music world knew that name. Theo Nakamura had been a piano prodigy himself before becoming one of the most respected conductors in the world. Now he served as the artistic director of the city's symphony orchestra. She took his hand, hoping hers wasn't trembling too obviously. "It's an honor to meet you, Maestro Nakamura." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "The honor is mine. I wonder if we might speak somewhere a bit quieter." Ms. Cho immediately stepped forward. "You can use the small reception room, sir. It's just through those doors." She turned to a nearby server. "Make sure they have whatever they need." May followed Maestro Nakamura to the quieter space, acutely aware of her borrowed dress and the eyes following them across the room. The small reception room was elegantly furnished with comfortable chairs and a coffee table. Once inside with the door closed, the noise from the ballroom became a distant murmur. "Please sit," Nakamura said, gesturing to one of the chairs. He took the one opposite, studying her with those keen eyes. "Now tell me your story, Mei Lin, and don't leave anything out." So May told him everything, about her grandmother teaching her to play on their old upright piano, about winning a scholarship to the academy, about having to drop out when her grandmother got sick, about working double shifts at the hotel to pay for night classes at the city college. "I practice whenever I can," she explained, "sometimes in the empty ballroom during my break. The night manager lets me use the piano if there's no event." Nakamura nodded thoughtfully. "Your technique is impressive, especially for someone who hasn't had formal training in years. But what strikes me most is your musicality, the feeling you put into your playing. That can't be taught." He leaned forward. Our principal pianist is retiring at the end of this season. We're holding auditions next month." May's heart skipped a beat. The City Symphony Orchestra was world-class. Their musicians were graduates of Juilliard, Curtis, and other elite conservatories. "Are you suggesting—" She couldn't even finish the question. "I'm suggesting you audition," Nakamura said simply. "I can't promise anything, of course. The competition will be fierce. But after what I heard tonight, I believe you deserve a chance." May tried to speak but found she couldn't. The lump in her throat was too big. After years of setting aside her dreams, of telling herself that someday things would be different, was this really happening? Nakamura reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. "My direct number," he said, handing it to her. "Call my assistant on Monday to schedule a proper audition." Before May could respond, the door opened and Ms. Cho stuck her head in. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, Maestro, but the auction is about to begin, and several patrons are asking if Ms. Lin might play again afterward." Nakamura raised an eyebrow at May. "Up to you, though I imagine you've had quite enough excitement for one evening." May thought about it. Part of her wanted to run home and call her best friend and scream with excitement about everything that had happened. But another part of her, the part that had come alive at the piano tonight, wasn't ready for the evening to end. "I'd be happy to play again," she said. Ms. Cho looked relieved. "Wonderful. I'll let the MC know." After she left, Nakamura stood and extended his hand again. "I look forward to hearing you play in a proper audition setting, May. Tonight might be the beginning of something extraordinary for you." May shook his hand, still struggling to believe this wasn't all a dream. "Thank you for the opportunity, Maestro," he smiled. "Talent creates its own opportunities. I'm merely opening a door. You'll have to walk through it yourself." With that, he left, rejoining the crowd in the ballroom. May stayed in the quiet room for a moment, taking deep breaths, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Her entire life had just changed course, like a river suddenly finding a new path to the sea. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Raj, her fellow server, peeking in with a huge grin on his face. "I can't believe you kept this secret," he said, slipping into the room and closing the door. "I mean, we all knew you played, but this?" He gestured wildly with his hands. "This is another level, May. You're trending online right now." "What?" May blinked at him. "What do you mean, trending?" Raj pulled out his phone and showed her a social media feed. Several guests had recorded her performance and posted clips online. One video already had thousands of views and comments. "The hotel's getting calls," Raj continued excitedly. "People asking who you are, if you're performing again, if you have an agent. It's crazy out there." May sat down heavily, her legs suddenly weak. "This is too much, too fast." "Too much? May, this is your moment." Raj sat beside her. "Do you know how many people dream of getting discovered like this? You deserve this. All those mornings I've seen you come in exhausted because you were up late practicing, all those lunch breaks spent at the piano instead of eating. It's finally paying off." May looked at her friend, gratitude welling up inside her. Raj had always been supportive, never making fun of her dedication to music the way some others had. "I just played a few pieces," she said. "It's not like I've accomplished anything yet." "Are you kidding me? You just blew away a room full of the richest, most connected people in the city. And that old guy you were talking to? My cousin works at the symphony. That's Theo Nakamura. He's like the godfather of classical music around here." May fingered the business card in her hand. "He wants me to audition for the symphony." Raj's eyes widened. "For real? May, that's incredible." Another knock at the door. This time it was the hotel manager. "Ms. Lin," he said formally, so different from how he'd addressed her that morning when she was just another employee. "The auction will be wrapping up soon. They'd like you to play for another 30 minutes after that if you're willing. The fee would be—" He mentioned a sum that made Raj gasp softly beside her. "That's more than I make in 2 weeks," May said without thinking. The manager had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Yes, well, professional musicians command professional rates." And after tonight's performance, you are certainly that. After he left, Raj turned to her with a serious expression. What are you going to play next? May thought about it. I'm not sure. Something different. Maybe some Gershwin? People always like that. Whatever it is, you'll kill it, Raj said confidently. He stood up. I should get back to work before they fire me. Unlike some people, I haven't suddenly become irreplaceable. He was almost at the door when May called after him. Raj, thank you for believing in me all this time. He smiled. What are friends for? Besides, now I can tell everyone I knew you. When? Left alone again, May closed her eyes. The evening had taken on a dreamlike quality, as if she had stepped into someone else's life. Yet it also felt strangely right, like she had finally found the path she was meant to be on all along. She thought about her tiny apartment with its second-hand furniture and the upright piano that took up too much space. She thought about her grandmother, who had sacrificed so much to give May music lessons as a child. She thought about the years of working double shifts, of practicing late into the night, of never quite giving up on her dream, even when it seemed impossible. The noise from the ballroom grew louder as the auction ended. Soon they would be calling for her again. May stood up and smoothed down her borrowed dress. Her hands, which had served countless drinks and carried countless trays, were now being recognized for what they could truly do. As she walked back toward the ballroom, several guests smiled and nodded at her. One woman reached out and squeezed her arm as she passed, saying, "You were magnificent, dear." The piano waited for her on the stage, gleaming under the lights. May approached it with confidence this time, no longer feeling like an imposter. She belonged here. Not because someone had given her permission, but because this was who she had always been, a musician, a pianist, an artist. As she took her seat at the bench, a hush fell over the crowd. May placed her fingers on the keys, took a deep breath and began to play. This time she started with Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, letting the playful, jazzy notes dance through the ballroom. And as she played, May knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same again. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of May's apartment, waking her earlier than she would have liked after such a late night. For a moment, she lay still, wondering if everything that had happened at the gala had been a dream. Then she spotted the elegant business card on her nightstand and the borrowed black dress hanging on her closet door, and she knew it had all been real. She reached for her phone and was immediately overwhelmed. Dozens of notifications lit up her screen. Messages from friends, former classmates, even teachers from the music academy she had attended years ago. Apparently, word had spread fast. More surprising were the emails and social media messages from strangers, people who had been at the gala or who had seen the videos online. Some were simple compliments, others were inquiries about booking her for events, and a few were from local reporters asking for interviews. This is insane, she muttered, putting the phone down without responding to any of them. She needed time to think, to process everything before deciding what to do next. Her tiny kitchen was barely big enough for one person, but May found comfort in the familiar routine of making coffee and toast. As the coffee brewed, she wandered over to her piano, the faithful old upright that had been her companion through years of struggle. She ran her fingers lovingly over the worn keys, remembering how different it felt from the magnificent Steinway she had played last night. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. May opened it to find Raj standing there, holding a newspaper and grinning from ear to ear. "Have you seen this?" he asked, pushing past her into the apartment and spreading the newspaper on her small table. There, on the front page of the local section, was a photo of May at the piano, her face captured in a moment of pure concentration as she played. The headline read, "From serving drinks to serving music, Waitress stuns elite crowd with piano performance." May groaned. They had to emphasize the waitress part, didn't they? "Are you kidding? That's what makes it a story." Raj pointed to the article. "Listen to this." In a moment straight out of a fairy tale, hotel server Mei Lin stepped in when famous pianist Yuri Kovalenko fell ill, delivering a performance that left the city's elite speechless. Multiple sources confirmed that Maestro Theo Nakamura, artistic director of the City Symphony Orchestra, was seen speaking with Lin afterward. May sank into a chair. "This is too much. I just filled in for one night." "One night that's changing your life," Raj countered, helping himself to coffee. "Have you checked your phone? The videos from last night have hundreds of thousands of views already." Before May could respond, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. "Hello? Ms. Lin? This is Patricia Wong from Channel 8 News. We'd love to have you on our morning show tomorrow to talk about your performance last night. It's such an inspiring story." May looked at Raj, who was nodding enthusiastically. "Can I call you back? I need to check my schedule." After hanging up, 2 more calls came in rapid succession, another news outlet and someone claiming to be a talent agent. "This is crazy," May said, turning her phone off. "I need to think. I can't just jump into whatever this is." Raj sat across from her at the small table. "What did Nakamura say exactly? About the audition?" May took a deep breath. "He said their principal pianist is retiring, and they're holding auditions next month. He wants me to try out." "That's huge, May. The City Symphony, that's like the big leagues." "I know." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "But I haven't played seriously in years. Those auditions will attract graduates from the best music schools in the world. People who've been practicing 8 hours a day, who have master's degrees in international competition experience. And none of them made a room full of rich snobs cry with their playing last night," Raj pointed out. "You did that." May smiled despite herself. "Some of them did look a bit teary." "The lady at table 12 was straight up sobbing into her napkin," Raj confirmed. "I saw it myself." Their laughter was interrupted by another knock at the door. This time it was Mrs. Chen from next door, an elderly woman who had always been kind to May. "I saw you in the paper," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "My granddaughter showed me the videos online too. I always heard you playing through the walls, but I had no idea you were so talented." May thanked her, slightly embarrassed by the attention. After Mrs. Chen left, promising to tell all her friends to watch for May on TV, Raj looked at his watch. "I've got to get to work," he said. "Some of us still have regular jobs. Speaking of which, are you coming in today?" May hadn't even thought about her shift at the hotel. "I should, shouldn't I? I can't just not show up. After last night, they'd probably roll out a red carpet for you." Raj laughed. "But seriously, you might want to call them. Things might be a bit weird today." After Raj left, May called the hotel and spoke to her supervisor. To her surprise, he was understanding and gave her the day off, even suggesting she take the weekend to figure things out. Apparently, the hotel had been fielding calls about her all morning. Alone again, May sat at her piano. If she was really going to audition for the symphony, she needed to practice. Seriously practice the way she had at the academy. She would need to select her audition pieces carefully, rebuild her finger strength and stamina, perhaps even find a coach if she could afford one. She began to play scales, slowly at first, then faster, feeling the familiar burn in her forearms as muscles that had grown accustomed to carrying trays were reminded of their true purpose. 2 hours later, she was deep into Bach's well-tempered clavier when her doorbell rang again. This time it was someone she didn't expect, Ms. Cho from the hotel, looking decidedly less intimidating in casual clothes instead of her usual sleek business attire. "May I come in?" she asked. May's apartment suddenly seemed very small and shabby, but she stepped aside to let Ms. Cho enter. "I won't stay long," Ms. Cho said, declining the offer of coffee. "I wanted to talk to you about last night." "I'm sorry for the deception," May began. "I should have been upfront about—" Ms. Cho waved away her apology. "You saved the event. That's all that matters. But that's not why I'm here." She placed an envelope on the table. "This is your payment for last night's performance." The hotel added a bonus. May opened the envelope and gasped at the amount. "Also," Ms. Cho continued, "I've spoken with the hotel management. They would like to offer you a new position, as the resident pianist for our lobby lounge and special events. The salary would be... She named a figure that made May sit down abruptly. It would include health insurance and other benefits, of course. I don't know what to say, May stammered. Don't say anything yet, Ms. Cho advised. Consider it one option among many. I suspect you'll have several offers coming your way in the next few days. She smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression that May had never seen before. For what it's worth, I think you have extraordinary talent. Whatever you decide, don't waste it. After Ms. Cho left, May sat at her piano again, but found herself too distracted to practice. Everything was happening so fast. A week ago, her biggest concern had been paying her rent on time. Now she had job offers, media requests, and an audition with the symphony orchestra. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a link to another video of her performance, this one taken from a different angle, capturing the moment when she had opened her eyes after finishing the Rachmaninoff and seen the crowd's reaction. The message simply read, "You changed. The room when you played. Don't stop." May wasn't sure who had sent it, but the words resonated with her. She had changed the room when she played. More importantly, the room had changed her. She turned back to her piano with renewed focus. The audition was a month away. She would need every minute of practice she could get. Days passed in a blur of activity. May gave a few carefully selected interviews, turned down dozens more, and politely declined the talent agents who suddenly wanted to represent her. She accepted the hotel's offer to become their resident pianist. The regular hours and steady income would give her the stability she needed to prepare for the symphony audition. Her first official performance in the hotel lobby drew a crowd, 3 times the usual size. Guests who would normally have walked past the piano without a glance now stopped to listen, many filming on their phones. The hotel management was thrilled with the attention. But the real work happened in the early mornings and late nights in her apartment. May practiced until her fingers ached and her neighbors complained, then switched to silent exercises she had learned at the academy. She reconnected with her former piano professor, who agreed to help her prepare for the audition. "Your technique has grown rusty in places," the professor told her bluntly after their first session. "But your musicality has deepened. You play with more heart now than you did as a student." "Is that enough?" May asked. "For the symphony audition?" The professor considered her question carefully. "Technical skills can be polished with practice. The connection you make with the music, that's rarer. Focus on both, and yes, I believe you have a real chance." 3 weeks before the audition, May received an unexpected visitor at the hotel. She was playing a gentle Schubert piece in the lobby when she noticed Maestro Nakamura sitting in a corner, listening intently. When she finished, he approached the piano. "You play differently here," he observed. "More intimately." May nodded. "The space is smaller, the audience is closer. And yet you still transport them somewhere else." He gestured to the hotel guests, who had been so absorbed in her playing that several had let their coffee grow cold. "That's the mark of a true artist, the ability to create a world with sound alone." "I've been practicing for the audition," May told him. "Every day." "Good, it will be challenging. We've had applications from pianists across the country." He paused. "But none of them has your story. Remember that when you play for the committee, you're not just performing notes on a page. You're telling your story through the music." As he turned to leave, he added, "By the way, I've arranged for you to have access to the symphony hall for practice sessions. The piano there is, well, you should get used to it before the audition. My assistant will be in touch with the details." May watched him walk away, overwhelmed by his generosity. The opportunity to practice on the actual audition piano was invaluable, and something few other candidates would have. That night, as she walked home from the hotel, May found herself smiling. A month ago, she had been invisible, just another server in a black uniform, moving quietly through rooms where important people talked over her head. Now those same people stopped to listen when she played, their conversations falling silent as her music filled the space. More importantly, she was no longer putting her dreams on hold. no longer telling herself, someday. Someday had finally arrived, and May was ready. The day of the audition arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle that matched May's nervous mood. She had barely slept, going over the pieces in her mind until the notes blurred together. Now, as she stood outside the imposing glass and concrete building that housed the City Symphony Orchestra, her stomach twisted with anxiety. "You've got this," Raj had told her that morning, stopping by her apartment with coffee and encouragement before his shift. "Just play like you did that night at the gala." Easier said than done. That night had been spontaneous, unexpected. This was different. A formal audition with judges watching her every move, evaluating her against pianists with far more impressive resumes. May took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving doors into the symphony hall's elegant lobby. A young woman at the reception desk directed her to a waiting area where several other pianists had already gathered. May recognized a few faces, graduates from prestigious conservatories whose careers she had followed online during her preparation. One woman was pacing nervously, mouthing silent notes to herself. A man sat perfectly still, eyes closed in meditation. Another was doing finger exercises on his knees. None of them looked up when May entered. She found a quiet corner and sat down, trying to calm her racing heart. The waiting room had a clock on the wall, its second hand ticking loudly in the tense silence. Each candidate would have 30 minutes, 15 to warm up on the concert grand piano in the hall, followed by 15 to perform their selected pieces for the judging panel. An hour crawled by. One by one, candidates were called in, returning later with expressions that revealed nothing about how they had performed. May looked up to see an assistant holding a clipboard. "You're next. Please follow me." Her legs felt strangely distant as she stood and followed the assistant through a series of hallways, finally emerging onto the stage of the main concert hall. The space was vast, over 2,000 seats, all empty except for a small group of people sitting in the center of the front rows. Among them, May recognized Maestro Nakamura. "You have 15 minutes to warm up," the assistant said. "Then, the panel will signal you to begin your audition pieces." May nodded, approaching the magnificent concert grand piano that dominated the stage. This was the instrument she had been allowed to practice on for the past week, thanks to Nakamura's intervention. Its touch was already familiar to her fingers, its voice known to her ears. As she began her warm-up scales, May tried to forget about the people watching her, about the other talented pianists waiting their turn, about everything except the music. Gradually, the familiar patterns calmed her nerves. Her fingers found their rhythm, her breathing steadied. Too soon, the 15 minutes were up. A woman from the panel stood. "Ms. Lin, whenever you're ready, please begin with Bach." May positioned herself at the piano, adjusting the bench one last time. She had chosen 3 pieces for the audition: Bach's Prelude and Fugue in D minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Beethoven's Sonata No. 14 Moonlight, first movement, and Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. A challenging program that would demonstrate both technical skill and emotional range. For a moment, she closed her eyes, thinking of her grandmother, of the nights practicing in her tiny apartment, of the hotel guests who had stood transfixed as she played in the lobby. Music had been her constant companion through it all, the one thing that had never abandoned her, even when circumstances had forced her to step away from formal study. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The Bach was precise and controlled each note clear as crystal in the perfect acoustics of the hall. May felt herself settling into the music, her anxiety melting away as the familiar patterns flowed from her fingers. The Beethoven followed, haunting and introspective, the melody singing over the rippling triplets in the left hand. By the time she reached the Chopin, May was no longer thinking about the audition, the judges, or even her own performance. She was simply playing, letting the music speak through her. The ballade began gently, almost like a lullaby, before building to passages of incredible technical difficulty and emotional intensity. As she played the final thundering chords, May felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the pure release of giving everything to the music. Silence filled the hall when she finished. May sat motionless at the piano for a moment, slowly returning to herself. "Thank you, Ms. Lin," said the woman who had spoken earlier. "That will be all for now. We'll be in touch within the week." May nodded, stood, and bowed slightly toward the panel before walking off stage. Her legs were shaking now, the adrenaline that had carried her through the performance beginning to ebb. In the hallway, she passed the next candidate, a young man who gave her a nervous smile. "How was it?" he whispered. "Just play your heart out," May told him. "Nothing else matters." The week that followed was the longest of May's life. She continued her performances at the hotel, threw herself into practice sessions at home, and tried not to think about the audition. Raj checked in daily, sometimes bringing takeout food when he suspected she was too distracted to cook for herself. "No news?" he would ask, and May would shake her head. 6 days after the audition, May was playing a Debussy piece in the hotel lobby when she noticed Maestro Nakamura slip into a seat near the back. Her hands faltered for just a moment before she recovered, finishing the piece with as much composure as she could muster. As the small crowd applauded, Nakamura approached the piano. His expression gave nothing away. "Walk with me?" he suggested. They stepped outside into the hotel's courtyard garden. The spring rain had stopped, leaving everything looking freshly washed and vibrant. "You played beautifully at the audition," Nakamura said after they had walked in silence for a moment. "Thank you," May replied, her heart pounding. "Has the committee made a decision?" Nakamura nodded. It was complicated. Many factors to consider. May steeled herself for disappointment. "I understand. The other pianists were very accomplished." "Yes, they were," he agreed. "Technically perfect, many of them. Years of elite training evident in every note." He paused. But something was missing in most of their performances. They stopped by a small fountain, water trickling peacefully over smooth stones. "Music isn't just about playing the right notes at the right time," Nakamura continued. "It's about communication, about making the audience feel something." He turned to face her. "Your Bach had minor technical imperfections. Your Beethoven was perhaps a bit too romantic in interpretation. But your Chopin made several members of the panel weep." May held her breath, afraid to hope. "We're offering you the position of associate pianist, not principal," he said finally. "A compromise position. The principal role went to someone with more experience and credentials, but the committee was unanimous in wanting your voice as part of our orchestra. Associate pianist. Not exactly what she had auditioned for, but still, a position with the City Symphony Orchestra. A real career in music after all these years." Thank you," May managed to say. "I accept. Of course I accept." Nakamura smiled. "I thought you might. The salary is modest, but it includes benefits. And there will be opportunities to grow, to take on more responsibilities as you prove yourself." As they walked back toward the hotel, he added, "The story of how we discovered you has created quite a buzz, you know. Ticket sales for our summer season are already up 15%. People want to hear the waitress who became a pianist overnight." May laughed. "Hardly overnight. More like 20 years of practice." "Indeed. Nothing worth doing happens overnight," Nakamura agreed. "Speaking of which, your first rehearsal is Monday morning at 9. Don't be late." 6 months later, May stood in the wings of the concert hall, waiting for her cue. Tonight was the opening of the symphony's fall season, and she would be performing a solo piece, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, with the full orchestra behind her. From her vantage point, she could see the hall was packed. Friends and former colleagues from the hotel had come to support her, including Ms. Cho and Raj, who had taken the night off from his new job as the hotel's event coordinator. Her old piano professor was there too, beaming with pride. In the front, row center, a small elderly woman sat with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly in her lap. May's grandmother had made the journey from her nursing home for this special night, her first time seeing her granddaughter perform with the symphony. May waited. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, From a child playing on her grandmother's old upright piano, to a struggling student forced to drop out of music school, to a waitress serving drinks to people who never looked at her face, and finally, to this moment, about to step onto one of the most prestigious stages in the city as a professional musician. The concertmaster finished tuning the orchestra. Maestro Nakamura stepped onto the podium, acknowledging the applause with a slight bow. Then he turned toward the wings and gestured for May to join them. She walked onto the stage, the spotlight finding her as she made her way to the gleaming concert grand piano at its center. The applause swelled, filling the hall with a sound sweeter than any music. As she took her seat and adjusted the bench, May caught her grandmother's eye. The old woman nodded once, a gesture that contained a lifetime of belief and encouragement. May placed her hands on the keys, looking to Nakamura for his cue. He raised his baton, and in the perfect silence that followed, May felt a sense of rightness wash over her. This was where she belonged, not hidden in the background, not serving others while setting aside her own dreams, but here, creating something beautiful that could touch hearts and change lives, just as music had changed hers. The clarinet began the opening glissando of Rhapsody in Blue, a wailing, climbing note that seemed to contain all the yearning and hope and joy that May had ever felt. And then her hands came down on the keys, joining her voice to the orchestra's, and together they began to tell a new story.